is Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Michael Franklin Varro Jr. We're going to be discussing his amazing book, Stories from the Boxcar, A Spiritual Journey. Available for purchase through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, cityofbooks.com, drfrankvarro.com, please, a whole host of places. Simply add in the information into a Google search bar and you're going to be greeted with all of them. And before we go any further, I want to take this opportunity and point out that Dr. Frank was brought to our network by that same publishing company, City of Books. So listen to me. If there's any writers out there listening in right now, you have gone through your process. You have worked tirelessly to complete your masterpiece. And now you find yourself in what appears to be a precarious position because, well, now you need help moving that book you just finished creating. Well, I'm going to give you some fantastic advice. Contact City of Books. People, they're one of the best in the business to do it, and this is exactly what they specialize in. So head on over to cityofbooks.com today and gather all of the ways that they're going to help maximize your creative endeavors. And listen, it is an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Frank here on the line. I mean, this is something to be admired, this is something to be applauded, and this is something that needs to be on your shelf. And at the end of the day, don't take my word for it. Take Dr. Frank's. It's his book. He's written it. It's his life. He's lived it. And he's going to be able to articulate it much better than I ever could. So sit back and strap in. Dr. Frank, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction. And thank you very much for being a guest. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fantastic, Dr. Frank. Thank you very much. Better than I deserve, if I'm being honest. But this is where we are.
Me too. Amen.
You got to stay humble. Yeah, you got to stay humble. But no, we are truly blessed here, and it is a pleasure to have you on the network with us. Dr. Frank, there's a lot of information that I want to cover here today. I want to start off by learning a little bit more about yourself. Now, because this book is a memoir of sorts, we're going to cover your background as well as the narrative. So let's just jump right in. Stories from the Boxcar, A Spiritual Journey. Tell us a little bit more about it.
I don't know if I should start at the beginning of my life. I'm a spoiled missionary brat. I grew up in Asia. Let's see, South China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. But I was actually born in Alaska. And so we like to say us TCKs, third culture kids, mostly includes MKs, missionary kids, business people, military. We leave one culture which we don't belong to. We go to another culture we don't belong to. And so we form our own culture. We call it a third culture. In between. So I'm kind of an international guy. And so let me start at the beginning of my life, even though there was a lot of stuff going on before that. And I was born in my grandfather, Rudolph Guilford Phipps's log cabin. He'd served as a medical missionary with the Nazarene Church in North China. My mother was 4 years old. My dear Aunt Irma was only 2, and they arrived in China, studied language, and practiced medicine for 20 years there. And then he gets tired of all that, if you can imagine, and he says, I got to get my Minnesota boys' hands down in the dirt. And he learns all about Alaska, and he homesteads built his own log cabins and homesteads a place outside of Fairbanks, Alaska, where he was given permission to start the entire Church of the Nazarene back in 1936. And there's just a whole lot more. You'll have to read my book about that. But in between assignments, my father was pastoring a church in 285 miles north of Edmonton. We said, it wasn't the Arctic Circle, but you could see it from there. And after serving there 3 years, my mother went back to the homestead to help clear land. My father went back to try to become a U.S. naturalized citizen since he was born in what was old Hungary. Now, after the Austro-Hungarian Empire fell, it was Romania. And so he spends the summer in Edmonton. She goes and 9 months pregnant with me, 9 months driving a tractor and still shooting deer and butchering rabbits and chickens, all that wonderful stuff in the wilderness. And I was born literally in St. Joseph's Hospital, but my first residence was my grandfather's log cabin in Fairbanks, Alaska. Well, segue quickly now to my father studying Chinese at the University of Washington in Seattle, and they've been put off for 7 years. They were scheduled to go in 40, but couldn't go right after they were married, and so they had to wait 7 years and pastor churches, and there's a lot of anguish and sad news about that story, which I won't cover now, but it's all in the book. And we finally board ship in San Francisco in 47. I'm 3 years old. My dad has just become a U.S. citizen in Tacoma, Washington, near Seattle. And we arrive in Shanghai after 3 weeks and getting our trunks. We go inland to the new Nazarene compound in South China, since the communists had taken over the mission compound up in North China. And we're only able to stay 2 years there. And women and children are ordered out. We take a ship, and Dad stays in China. We didn't know if he was alive or injured or anything. They could see through their binoculars the Red Chinese Army, and they were looking at each other through their binoculars. But they finally chain their 47 Chev to a flat car, make it somehow with green wood. Couldn't get up a head of steam, but they finally make it to Hong Kong and escape. Long story short, we spent 7 long years during that time. I lost my brother, born in North Dakota, killed at a church conference in a car accident in Walla Walla, Washington, and we finally make it back to China, to the Chinese, at least in Hong Kong briefly, and then Taiwan. So I grew up in South China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. I went to boarding school in Hong Kong. I went to boarding school in Taiwan, graduated then in 62 and made it to Seattle, where I was a music major on scholarship, met my wife, also my accompanist. And so you're getting a real short version of the sketch of what's going on here. Our daughter was born in Taiwan later when I went back with her. And then our son was born in Oregon. My first college job, choral music in Oregon, and then we made it to back to write the dissertation in Seattle, only to go to Ohio, where I served a couple years there. Our son Robert was born. So our 3 children, our oldest daughter in Taiwan, our second child, son, born in Oregon, and our third, Robert, born in Ohio. Each of the places where we had taught. Make it to Texas, in West Texas, the conductor of the Odessa Midlands Symphony and Chorus, and then later to Eastern Texas, Lamar University in Beaumont. And finally, God said, okay, enough running away from me. He got a hold of me, and I went back to seminary and got a doctorate, a second doctorate, then in counseling. And that's kind of the sketch. We've been here in Houston now for 38 years. Well, I can't remember how many years, but that's kind of the background, and there's a whole lot more in between. So I decided, well, somebody's got to write this story down, and they're all gone, so I'm going to write it. And it's a fabulous book, not because I wrote it, but because it's just an amazing story of God's grace in my life and 5 generations of our family.
There you have it. Well, listen, I'm so glad that you did, because now we get to embark upon this magnificent journey alongside you with this book. People, again, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, City of Books, drfrankvarro.com. pick up your copies of Stories from the Boxcar, A Spiritual Journey. You know, Dr. Frank, next question that I'd love to get into here. Curiosity for myself, but of course, I know why this is something that is appealing to you. I mean, this is your life. This is your history and your family's history. But what would you say was a highlight for you in the process, or something that surprised you that you weren't anticipating before you began writing it?
I like to say it was the story of the rise and the fall and the recovery of Frank Varro and the grace of God. That's what the story is about. But I like to say I was a spoiled missionary kid. I took God's grace for granted. If you deserve it, it's not grace, right? Yeah. And so along the way, I took my eyes off of the goal, and I wanted to be the world's greatest choral director, and I thought I'd reached the top when it was just the time to fall. Naively, bad influences in my life, but I hit the bottom. And but there were a lot of really wonderful things along the way I had to tell about. But then it finally came to May the 7th, 1987, over 35, 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's in the book, but I hit the bottom. And the only way up, the only way to go when you hit the bottom is up. And I did. And I took a different path. I had the inspiration you asked for my book was actually my father in many ways. He was a homeless Hungarian, 13 months old, born in what is now Romania. His father, we call him Pop, had worked on the railroad and met his beautiful bride, my grandmother, in Timișoara, now Romania. And in secret, they were reunited in England and took a tramp steamer over to New York, made their way to Milwaukee, and found an opportunity for homesteading in Regina, Saskatchewan, 100 miles south of Regina. And that homestead failed. She had two other pregnancies, wonderful Uncle Steve, Istvan, we say in Hungarian, Lajos, which is Louis or Lou, my Uncle Steve and my uncle, we call him Uncle Bud and Lou, mm-hmm. born there in the homestead. But she was complications in her fourth pregnancy, and she not only lost the baby, she lost her life because sepsis set in, and they couldn't make it into Regina from the farm in time. It crushed him. He had promised her, yes, I will find Jesus in my life someday, but he kept putting it off, and now she's gone, and he is devastated. And they lost the homestead, and he hitchhiked in to Regina, caught a train. He said, I've got to find the church where she was. Well, they didn't have any of those churches now called the Apostolic Christian Church, but it was called the Nazarene, is a part of the Anabaptist Reform movement in the old country. And she was so active in the Reform movement there in the old country. He had to find her church, and he finally finds one in Akron, Ohio, of all places. So he came in illegally into the U.S. He confesses his sin when he becomes a Christian, and the Akron police arrest him for crossing the border. Yeah, a lot of good it did me to become a Christian. Now I'm in jail. But a good Hungarian lawyer gets him out. He gets back to Regina, and they find that they lost the homestead to get into Regina. He's selling coal on the streets of Regina, and the boys are homeless. And my father went to first grade 6 different times, didn't speak English until they all learned the English, from the Hungarian. And it's just an amazing miracle after miracle after miracle. You'll have to read the book to find out what I'm talking about. But he finally starts going to church. My dad does, and course, Pop, he remarries one from the old country, brings her back here. They're married by proxy. He brings her back into Regina, and they go to a different church. But my dad finds the Church of the Nazarene. Well, he thought it was the Nazarene. It was a Reformed church from the old country. And he becomes active in the choir, and then he becomes a Christian. And then, lo and behold, he's called to be a missionary to China, to the ancient and the ancestors of the Hungarian people before they migrated to Hungary. And so, unbeknown to him, one of the China missionaries, who was a babysitter for what becomes his wife, 4 years old at entry of China, and her sister Irma, and they end up. He finishes high school. He hitchhikes to Pasadena, California. He works as a union carpenter, put himself through all these churches that can't pay him a salary. He put himself through school as a carpenter. He said, I only wanted to be the carpenter from Regina, like the carpenter from Nazareth. That's what he always said. And they meet, and they're married, and they're scheduled to go to China in 40, except the Japanese war with the Chinese. And they cried themselves to sleep that he takes a church in north of Edmonton. It wasn't the Arctic Circle, but you could see it from there, he said. And my sister was born. And then later on, a year and a half later, I was born up in Alaska. The grandfather that was a Nazarene doctor in North China in the hospital becomes starts the Church of the Nazarene in Alaska, and all of Alaska, and as an extension ministry out of Seattle. And finally, he becomes a U.S. citizen in 47. I was 3 years old, and we finally make my first venture in my life. They're finally going to China after all those 7 years. And well, I don't want to tell the whole story, but I mean that I entered the picture there at that point. My younger sister was 10 months old. There's pictures in my book of us getting on the ship in 47. My older sister was 7. Was 5. I was 3, and my younger sister was 10 months old. We spend just 2 years there, and the communists come. We come back. He pastors in North Dakota and Washington State. A younger brother born in North Dakota was killed at a church conference in Washington State. And they finally give up trying to go with the mission board that they had planned and go with another one. They went back to Taiwan, or they went back to the Orient, to Taiwan, briefly to Hong Kong. And then that's the whole Taiwan period for me. Then I later marry my accompanist in Seattle. We go on the teaching route for several years, and I make the fall. You let the world influence you. You're sucked in by the world. And so in May of 87, I gave up running, and I went back to graduate school, seminary, became a pastor, prison chaplain, hospice chaplain. And so that's what the stories from the Boxcar are, all the inspiration my father gave me in telling me all the stories from the old country, and then adding my stories of my mother. So the inspiration from my book really is them and all the stories that I was told. And I learned this as a counselor. When you do counseling with a child, you draw this picture. It's a picture of a house. Well, the house is you. This is my own house, but my house became my dad's boxcar, became my boxcar. It's the story of my life, and the story of my family that influenced me. It passed on down to my children. And also, one other really important point. Along the way, we traced the Hungarian heritage I had, the story of Varro Mihai, or Michael Varro in Hungarian. And each one has received a reshmozar, a symbol of faithful servitude. It's a mortar and pestle, an old bronze from 1588, and I have it in my possession now. And all these things inspired me for this book. and one by one, as my father and mother and the aunts and the uncles all left, I said, this story hasn't been written. And I was not planning to write it. But now I've finished. This is my first book, a Quilogy, but it tells the story of the Boxcar and all the things that influence my life is my Boxcar. And when I get to heaven, my Boxcar will be my mansion. Okay, that's what I wanted to say about being inspired by that.
There you have it. People, listen, there is so much happening here. I could sit here and I can talk to Dr. Frank for hours, okay? I am engulfed. I'm at the edge of my seat listening to every word so intently, and I know you all are as well, okay? As we start to close out here, because, of course, I do have to remind myself, Benji, this is not about you. We got to own it in here. So as we start to close out here, Dr. Frank, couple of things. Two-part question here, and I think it's safe to assume, but you know what happens when you do that, so I'm not going to. First and foremost, who would you say is your intended reader for the book? And two, what is the main message that you hope that they take from it upon completing it?
Never fear failure. From the beginning of our lives to the end of our lives. It's not how you fail. It's what you learn from your failure. And I failed big time, but everything I've got, I don't deserve. It's a gift from God. And if you don't learn from how you failed, you'll just keep repeating over and over your failures. That's my message. And you're right. It's not about me. It's about I said recently, I heard that Son of Sam became a born-again Christian. And I go, listen, if he can save Son of Sam, he can save me. And so it's hope. It's hope in the midst of failure. I don't deserve all the wonderful things that happened to me. I could tell you one miracle after another. And in Europe, being stranded when we finally drive through, my wife and our daughter, and with the London dog strike, there's no way we're going to be able to ship our car. We ordered through the PX in Taiwan, and we're not going to ever be. I'm just fall on the mercy of the U.S. Embassy. And the people that had been in Taiwan in our Bible study were now located in Shape in Belgium, and they were there back from their vacation. And he ships by car along with all the others, and it didn't cost anything. When our daughter was born in Taiwan, the doctor, the U.S. doctor, he said, I can't accept any money because we can only give serve State Department people and military, and you're not. So I said, I got to give you something. He said, well, just pray for me. And he was a wonderful Christian man, too. God just blessed him. He said, I was going to drown. I was going to be killed. There are many times you've got to read the book about how wonderful and how many miracles. It's fiction because I only filled in the names I couldn't remember, the places I'd been, but it's all true. Every word of it is true, and it's because of the grace of God in my life.
You have it. I love it. I love it. People, head on over to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, cityofbooks.com, drfrankvarro.com. Get lost in all of it. The anchor today was Stories from the Boxcar, a spiritual journey, but make sure to check into his 2 previous books that were written for his dissertations, and then check back in frequently because there's another one on the horizon that you're going to want to get lost in as well. But it starts with Stories from the Boxcar. Dr. Frank, this has been an absolute pleasure. Such an honor. Thank you once again for being a guest on People of Distinction.
My distinct pleasure. God bless you, my friend.